Officer Marcus Hayes and his K-9 partner, Shadow, were patrolling the crowded tunnels of New York's subway when the shepherd suddenly froze. His ears pinned, his growl cut through the roar of trains, locking onto a well-dressed woman carrying a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. She wasn't running. She wasn't shouting. Yet Shadow refused to let her pass. In that moment, hundreds of commuters stopped in their tracks, unaware that what came next would unravel a chilling secret hidden beneath the city's busiest station. This is a story of instinct, redemption, and a dog's unshakable sense of truth. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments so we can see how far this story travels. The city above was never quiet. New York in late winter carried a cold edge that slipped between the steel towers and down into the streets where steam rose from manhole covers and headlights reflected off wet asphalt. The Hudson winds whipped down the avenues, leaving cheeks raw and fingertips stinging even through gloves. Beneath the streets, however, the subway tunnels had their own rhythm, a pulse of electric light, screeching brakes, and the endless shuffle of shoes. It was here, at Times Square Station during the height of the evening rush, that the air seemed thick with impatience. Travelers shoved past one another, the scent of fried food from kiosks mingling with the metallic tang of the rails, and the booming announcements echoed across the tiled walls. For Officer Marcus Hayes, it was just another shift, until his partner froze. Marcus was a man shaped by the city as much as by the badge he wore. At 42, he carried a tall, sturdy frame, shoulders broad beneath the dark navy of his NYPD uniform. His jaw was square, defined, but marked with faint scars of acne from youth and a thin line above his right cheek where glass had cut him years ago during a bar fight he had broken up. His dark brown hair, peppered with gray along the temples, was cut short, and his trimmed beard carried specks of silver that made him look older than he felt. There was a weight in his green eyes, the kind of weariness born from too many scenes of tragedy, but also a quiet resilience, a stubborn refusal to give up. Marcus had once lost a partner during a violent arrest gone wrong in the Bronx, and ever since he had developed a cautious edge to his character. Less laughter, more measured silences. Yet, with Shadow, his K-9, there was a softer side. Shadow had managed to draw out what few people could: patience, trust, and the faint hint of a smile when no one else was looking. Shadow was a German shepherd, 6 years old, his fur a mix of sable and black that gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the station. He was powerful but lean, his posture always taut, as if coiled like a spring, ready to react in an instant. His amber eyes carried intelligence, scanning constantly, and his ears twitched at every shift of sound around him. Shadow had been rescued as a pup from an abandoned building fire in Queens, and he had spent hours pressed against the unconscious body of a firefighter who had not survived. That trauma seemed to have carved something unique in the dog, a heightened sensitivity to human distress, especially with children. Trainers noticed it quickly, and he was chosen for behavioral threat detection rather than standard narcotics or explosives. To strangers, Shadow was intimidating, a predator carved from muscle and instinct. To Marcus, he was family, a guardian with a soul too old for his years. The two of them patrolled the packed station with routine calm. Marcus nodded occasionally to commuters, his voice steady but rarely used unless necessary, while Shadow trotted at his side with quiet discipline. The evening rush was chaos. Businessmen in long coats, teenagers in hoodies and earbuds, tourists clutching maps and shopping bags, mothers tugging impatient children. The loudspeaker announced delays on the downtown 1 train, and groans rippled across the crowd. Marcus adjusted his belt, keeping one hand loosely near the leash, when suddenly Shadow slowed, his body stiffening. The shepherd's ears pricked forward, nose twitching, and then his stance shifted from casual walk to rigid alertness. Marcus followed the dog's gaze through the sea of people. 20 feet ahead, moving smoothly past a row of benches, was a woman. She stood out, not for anything obvious at first, but because she didn't move like the others. Where most people rushed, she glided. Her coat was tailored, a sleek gray wool that hugged her slender frame, and her posture was upright, with an elegance that drew subtle glances. She appeared to be in her early 30s, tall, with a graceful build and pale olive skin that looked untouched by the grime of subway life. Her hair was jet black, tied neatly into a low bun at the nape of her neck, and a silk scarf with a designer pattern draped from her collar. In her arms she held a small child, perhaps 1 year old, swaddled in a soft blue blanket. The baby's head rested against her shoulder, unmoving, tiny curls of brown hair peeking from the edge of the fabric. Shadow let out a low whine, his tail rigid, then his muscles quivered as a growl rumbled deep in his chest. Marcus stiffened immediately. Shadow rarely growled, and when he did, it was never without cause. "What is it, boy?" Marcus murmured, his eyes narrowing on the woman. The sound drew glances from commuters nearby, who edged away with wary curiosity. The woman's face was striking. Her features were fine, symmetrical, her cheekbones high, and lips painted a soft shade of rose that contrasted against the coldness of her ice-blue eyes. She did not appear startled by the dog at first. Instead, she tightened her hold on the bundle in her arms, adjusting the blanket as though shielding her baby from the harsh lights and noise of the station. But Marcus noticed something. The baby had not stirred. Not at the dog's growl, not at the jostle of the crowd, not even at the sudden shrill screech of an arriving train. Most children would flinch, cry, or shift. This child remained utterly motionless, like porcelain. Shadow barked once, sharp and commanding, the sound echoing through the vaulted ceiling of the station. Heads turned, phones were raised, people stopped mid-stride, curiosity cutting through their rush. The bark was followed by another, louder, and Shadow pulled against the leash, blocking the woman's path entirely. Marcus stepped forward, hand raised to calm the crowd. His voice was steady but carried authority. "Ma'am, excuse me, may I have a word with you?" The woman paused. For a moment her expression flickered, something between surprise and irritation. But then she smiled politely, a practiced smile. "Yes, officer?" Her voice was smooth, measured, without a hint of fear. "I'm Officer Hayes, NYPD K9 unit. My partner here is trained to detect unusual behavior. He seems concerned. Could I ask your name and your destination?" Marcus's tone remained professional, but his eyes studied every twitch of her expression. The woman's grip on the child tightened slightly. "Isabella," she replied. "Isabella Cruz. I'm just heading to Brooklyn. My baby's tired, that's all." She shifted her stance, ready to move, but Shadow stepped sideways, blocking again, growl intensifying. Marcus felt his heart thump harder against his ribs. Around them, the station's chaos seemed to hush, as if the entire terminal was holding its breath. The woman's ice-blue eyes flicked down to the dog, then back up to Marcus, still calm. But the corners of her mouth pressed into a faint line of tension. The baby remained still, disturbingly still, as the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and the roar of a departing train faded into silence. And in that moment, Marcus knew something was deeply wrong. Shadow had seen it before any human eye could. The air in Times Square station seemed to thicken as Marcus Hayes stepped closer to the tall woman who called herself Isabella Cruz. the weight of hundreds of staring eyes pressed in from all directions, though the noise of the subway still roared around them. The screech of departing trains, the announcements over the PA, and the low hum of conversation from the restless crowd. Yet Marcus's attention was pinned only on the woman and the bundle in her arms. Shadow's steady growl reverberated through the tiled walls, low and unyielding, his amber eyes fixed on the unmoving child. Isabella's composure was impressive at first glance. She stood tall, perhaps 5'9", slender with the kind of posture that came from someone used to drawing attention. Her skin carried a faint olive tone, smooth and seemingly flawless beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. Her hair, dark as raven feathers, was pulled into a low bun that revealed the clean angles of her jaw and cheekbones. She wore minimal jewelry save for a thin silver bracelet that clinked faintly when she adjusted the child. Her voice was calm, but her pale blue eyes betrayed something deeper, a flicker of anxiety that no polished exterior could conceal. "I told you," Isabella said evenly, clutching the baby closer. "I'm on my way home to Brooklyn. My little boy needs rest. The noise here is upsetting him." Marcus studied her closely. Years on the job had taught him that words were often less important than the hesitations between them. He noticed how her right hand trembled slightly as she smoothed the edge of the blanket, how her gaze darted toward the exits before returning to meet his. He lowered his voice so the crowd would hear less, though he knew they were hanging on every movement. "Ma'am, I'll need to see your ticket and some identification." Standard procedure. For the first time, Isabella faltered. Her lips parted as if to protest, but she caught herself quickly, forcing a smile. "Of course." She shifted the baby onto her left arm, reaching into her purse with her right. The purse was sleek leather, an expensive brand Marcus vaguely recognized, but the way she dug through it seemed unconvincing. When she finally pulled out a ticket, Marcus held out his hand. The paper was slightly crumpled, as though hastily handled. He glanced at the details. A subway pass. Valid, but nothing that proved her story of returning from elsewhere. "And your ID?" he pressed. Her jaw tightened. "Do you really think I'd be carrying my license in a place like this?" "I was just trying to get home." Her voice had lost its smoothness, now tinged with irritation. Shadow barked again, short and sharp. The sound ricocheted across the vaulted ceiling, making several commuters flinch. The baby did not stir. Marcus's stomach twisted with unease. Most infants would have cried by now, or at least shifted at the sudden noise. This one remained eerily still, head tilted against Isabella's shoulder like a doll. A man from the crowd stepped forward, curiosity written across his bearded face. He was middle-aged, with thinning blonde hair, round spectacles, and the kind of wrinkled brown jacket that smelled faintly of cigarettes. "Hey, officer, maybe the dog's just confused." "Babies sleep heavy sometimes, don't they?" His voice carried the tone of someone who enjoyed inserting himself into situations he didn't fully understand. Marcus gave him a quick shake of the head, silently urging him to stay back. Isabella seized on the comment. "Exactly. He's just asleep." Nothing strange about that. She tightened her grip on the bundle, her eyes darting to the impatient crowd pressing closer, phones raised like 1,000 watchful eyes. Marcus ignored the interruption and focused on Isabella. "Where exactly in Brooklyn are you headed?" he asked, keeping his tone conversational but steady. "Williamsburg," she answered too quickly. The name slipped off her tongue without thought, as if rehearsed. Marcus noted the speed, the sharpness. He had seen countless suspects stumble over such details, and though the response was smooth, it lacked authenticity. He leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice. "Ma'am, I've been doing this job long enough to know when something isn't adding up. My partner here has never once been wrong. If there's any chance that child isn't safe, you'd better start being honest with me right now." The softness in Isabella's expression cracked, if only for a moment. Her eyes flashed with something harder, fear mixed with defiance. She shifted her weight, positioning her body as if to shield the child from both Marcus and Shadow. The crowd rustled with tension, murmurs spreading. A young woman nearby, with curly brown hair tucked under a knitted beanie, whispered to her friend, "That baby hasn't moved the whole time. Something's not right." The whisper wasn't quiet enough. It rippled into the crowd like a spark. People began muttering, doubt spreading like wildfire. Isabella's polite facade was crumbling. She drew herself taller, her chin lifting. "This is harassment. I've told you my name, my destination. I've shown you my ticket. I don't need to stand here being accused while my baby sleeps. Now, if you'll excuse me." She began to step forward, but Shadow lunged into her path with a forceful growl, teeth flashing just enough to freeze her in place. Gasps rang out from the onlookers. Marcus steadied his hand on the leash, but didn't pull Shadow back. His heart hammered against his ribs. He had learned long ago to trust the dog's instincts over any human story. He took a deliberate breath and spoke again, his voice quiet but firm, a tone that carried finality. "Isabella Cruz, until I confirm the welfare of that child, you're not going anywhere." For the first time, her mask broke. The pale blue eyes widened, and in them Marcus caught the raw glint of desperation. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and her arms clutched the bundle tighter. Too tight, as if the act of holding was less protective and more possessive. The crowd, sensing the rising storm, pulled back slightly, creating a circle of space around them. The woman with the beanie grabbed her friend's arm, eyes wide. The bearded man muttered something under his breath, unease replacing his earlier bravado. The baby remained silent. The growl of Shadow deepened, vibrating like a warning drumbeat through the tiled cavern of the station. The scene had transformed in minutes from routine patrol to a confrontation that could shift in any direction. Marcus could feel the tension coil tighter with every second, as if the entire city had funneled into this one moment beneath the streets. And though he did not yet know the truth, he understood one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever this woman was hiding, the danger was real, and Shadow would not let it pass unnoticed. The tension at Times Square Station was a living thing, pressing down on Officer Marcus Hayes as he faced Isabella Cruz. Shadow stood like a wall of muscle and instinct, growling softly with each shift of the woman's feet. The crowd had encircled them, commuters craning their necks, whispers bouncing off the tiled walls like echoes of unease. Marcus's hand hovered near the radio on his shoulder, prepared for the next move, when suddenly it crackled to life. "Unit 12, came the dispatcher's voice, clear yet threaded with urgency. "Be advised, bolo issued from Queens Precinct. Suspect, female, early 30s, dark hair, gray coat, accompanied by male child, approximately 2 years of age, wrapped in a blue blanket. Reported abduction occurred this morning. Approach with caution." The words landed like thunder. Marcus froze, eyes narrowing as he glanced at Isabella. The description matched her down to the last detail. The crowd sensed the shift instantly, murmurs surging louder. Phones lifted higher, screens glowing like fireflies in the dim station, recording every second. Isabella's expression faltered. Her ice-blue eyes widened just for an instant before she masked the crack with a forced composure. She hugged the bundle closer, her pale knuckles pressing white against the fabric. "This is ridiculous," she hissed. "I don't know what you think you've heard, But you're making a mistake. Marcus's jaw clenched. He was not a man given to quick judgment. His years on the force had taught him to verify, to trust, but confirm. Yet the convergence of Shadow's instincts and the dispatcher's alert made denial impossible. He stepped forward, his tall frame casting a shadow across Isabella's face. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying authority that cut through the din of the station, "I need you to stay exactly where you are. That child may be the subject of an active investigation." Shadow barked once, loud and commanding, punctuating the command. The sound silenced even the chatter of the crowd. From the far edge of the circle, a transit officer hurried forward. His name was Officer Daniel Ruiz, a man in his mid-30s with a compact, athletic build and a clean-shaven jaw that revealed strong, angular features. His brown skin glistened faintly with sweat beneath the fluorescent lights, and his close-cropped black hair was damp from the humidity of the tunnels. Ruiz was known among colleagues as diligent, though he carried a wariness in his dark eyes, a habit formed after surviving a near-fatal knife attack 2 years prior. That incident had left him cautious but fiercely protective of civilians, sometimes to the point of bluntness. "Hayes," Ruiz called, his voice urgent as he cut through the ring of onlookers. "I caught that broadcast, too." "She matches perfectly." He stopped beside Marcus, placing a steady hand on his belt. His presence added weight to the situation, the kind of reinforcement Marcus knew the crowd would recognize. Isabella turned sharply toward Ruiz, her face tightening. "This is harassment. 2 officers, 1 dog, and a mob of strangers accusing a mother of kidnapping her own son?" Her words were sharp, tinged with desperation. Ruiz's gaze flicked to the child. He frowned deeply, brow furrowing. "That boy hasn't moved once, not even when the dog barked. Kids don't sleep like that, lady." The crowd rippled with murmurs, agreeing, suspicion spreading like wildfire. A young man in a baseball cap muttered loudly, "That ain't normal!" And the statement was picked up, repeated, fueling the tension. Marcus felt the pressure of the moment mounting. The dispatcher's words replayed in his mind. Missing child. Blue blanket. Female suspect. Every piece fit too neatly. He adjusted his stance, straightening to his full height, green eyes locking onto Isabella's icy blue. "Ma'am, for the safety of that child, I'm asking you to hand him to me." Now, for the first time, panic flickered openly in Isabella's eyes. Her lips parted, but no words came at first. Then she shook her head violently, black hair slipping from its neat bun to brush against her cheek. "No, you don't understand. He's mine. He's mine." The declaration rang hollow, her voice cracking on the last word. Shadow snarled, teeth flashing, his entire body taut like a drawn bow. Ruiz took a step forward, his hand inching toward his cuffs. "Don't make this harder, ma'am. We don't want to escalate in front of all these people. Just give us the kid, and we'll sort this out properly." The crowd pressed closer, drawn by the spectacle despite the danger. A woman clutching a shopping bag whispered, "God, is she really a kidnapper?" While another pulled out her phone and began live streaming, her voice breathless with excitement. The station had transformed into a stage, the officers and Isabella unwilling actors in a play of fear and suspicion. Isabella's chest rose and fell rapidly, her breath coming in shallow bursts. She looked left, then right, calculating escape routes, but Shadow's position cut her off. The German shepherd's amber eyes burned with unwavering focus, a silent message that no movement would go unchecked. Marcus's radio crackled again, breaking the standstill. Unit 12, update. Victim identified as Toby Moore, age 2, last seen with non-custodial woman, mother deceased. Custody assigned to grandmother, Eleanor Moore. Suspect remains at large. Proceed with restraint. The name hit Marcus hard. The missing child had an identity now. Toby Moore. He glanced at the bundle, the tiny curls of brown hair visible against the blanket, and a knot tightened in his chest. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was real. Isabella's face drained of color, her pale complexion nearly ashen under the fluorescent glow. For the first time, her voice shook. I can explain. But Marcus wasn't interested in explanations anymore. His tone sharpened, echoing through the station. You will. But first, that child comes with us. The subway platform felt like it was holding its breath. Dozens of passengers stood frozen, their faces illuminated by the cold fluorescence and the glow of cell phone screens. Marcus Hayes kept his stance firm, his hand hovering near his holster, though he had no desire to escalate in front of so many witnesses. Officer Daniel Ruiz lingered at his side, a solid presence whose dark eyes never left Isabella Cruz. Shadow, every muscle taut, positioned himself like a barricade between Isabella and any possible escape. His amber eyes gleamed with unshakable focus, his body vibrating with restrained energy. Isabella shifted under the weight of every gaze. The once elegant composure she wore like armor was cracking. Sweat glistened faintly at her temples, catching the sterile light, and her grip on the child in the blue blanket had become so tight that the fabric bunched unnaturally. Her pale blue eyes darted around the crowd, searching for sympathy, an ally, an exit. Marcus took a deliberate step closer, his broad shoulders blocking part of the onlooker's view. His voice was steady but clipped, the voice of a man who had heard every excuse and could smell dishonesty in the air. Ma'am, we now have a confirmed broadcast that this child may be a missing person. Your ticket doesn't match your story. And this boy, he gestured towards the bundle, hasn't moved once. Why don't you tell me again where you're coming from? Her lips trembled, then pressed together tightly. Finally, she forced out the words. Miami. I flew in this morning. My baby wasn't feeling well, so I came straight from the airport to see a specialist in Brooklyn. That's why I look out of sorts. You're misinterpreting everything. Her voice shook slightly, betraying nerves that her polished appearance could not conceal. Ruiz folded his arms across his chest, his compact build radiating skepticism. You flew from Miami? Where's your boarding pass? Where's your luggage? His dark brows furrowed, jaw tightening. He had dealt with countless liars in the subway system, fare evaders, dealers, hustlers, and he knew the tells. The lack of details, the inconsistencies, the hollow confidence all rang the same bells. Isabella's face hardened, as if insulted. I didn't bring luggage. It was just an overnight trip. I came for one purpose, to help my son. She rocked the child slightly, though the boy's head lolled unnaturally, no small movements of breathing or twitching fingers that would normally betray life. Shadow gave a sharp, guttural snarl, his teeth bared as he stepped forward. The sound rattled down the tunnel like a rolling drum. Several people in the crowd gasped, and one woman yelped before covering her mouth. Marcus yanked slightly on the leash, but he didn't order Shadow back. He trusted the dog too much to silence him. Shadow wasn't showing aggression toward Isabella. His eyes weren't on her. They were locked on the motionless child, unwavering and intense, as though the shepherd sensed something deeper than human eyes could perceive. Marcus's green eyes narrowed. He had seen infants on patrols before, sleeping on subways, restless in strollers, crying in arms. They always moved, shifted, whimpered, breathed visibly. This child had remained like stone for far too long, a sick dread twisted in his gut. This was more than a kidnapping. Something worse was hiding beneath the surface. A man from the crowd, tall and wiry with sunken cheeks and a patchy beard, stepped forward slightly. His plaid shirt hung loosely over a thin frame, and his tired eyes revealed a life of hardship. "Officer," he said hoarsely, "I raised 3 kids in this city. Babies don't stay that still unless something's wrong. Maybe she ain't telling you the whole truth." His words carried the gravel of experience, and a murmur of agreement spread through the bystanders. Isabella snapped, her polished mask shattering. "Enough! I don't owe you people explanations. This is my child. Mine!" Her voice cracked on the last word, raw and unconvincing. Her knuckles gleamed white as she clutched the boy. Marcus saw the desperation flash across her face, a storm of denial and fear. He softened his tone slightly, shifting from confrontation to persuasion, though his stance remained guarded. "Isabella, listen to me. If he's really your son, then let us help him. Look at him. He hasn't stirred, hasn't breathed visibly in minutes. If he's sick, he needs medical attention right now. Don't let pride or fear put him in danger." For a heartbeat, Isabella's icy gaze wavered. Her lips parted as if to answer, but she snapped her mouth shut again. Her breathing quickened, chest heaving beneath her gray coat. "You don't understand," she muttered, almost to herself. "He's mine." "They said he was mine. They told me I could have him back." Marcus stiffened. "Who told you?" She shook her head violently, dark strands of hair falling loose from her bun. "It doesn't matter." "You wouldn't believe me," Ruiz stepped in, his voice sharp. "Try us." "Because right now, lady, you're one step away from being cuffed on the platform in front of half of New York." Isabella's breathing grew ragged, her hands trembling as she rocked the child too roughly. Shadow growled louder, moving closer, so near that Marcus could feel the leash vibrating with the dog's restrained power. The shepherd's teeth glinted in the fluorescent light, his tail stiff, his eyes locked on the boy like a sentinel seeing through the facade. The crowd, electrified by the escalating drama, surged in whispers and gasps. A woman in a red scarf muttered to her friend, "She's lying." "Look at her." A man with a baseball cap raised his phone higher, live-streaming the confrontation to an unseen audience. The entire station seemed to lean inward, waiting for the inevitable unraveling. Finally, Isabella's composure shattered. Her voice rose, wild and brittle. "You don't know what it's like! To lose everything, to be told you'll never hold your child again. And then someone comes to you, promising it isn't over, that there's a way, that you can have him back." Her eyes burned with desperation, tears spilling down her cheeks, smudging the careful makeup. "I couldn't say no." "I couldn't," Marcus's chest tightened. The confession was fragmented, strange, and troubling, but the raw emotion was undeniable. This wasn't simply a case of a criminal snatching a child for ransom. Something darker, more manipulative, was at work. He exchanged a sharp glance with Ruiz, who frowned deeply. Ruiz muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Marcus to hear. "This isn't just a kidnapping. She's caught up in something." Marcus nodded grimly, his gaze steady on Isabella. "We'll find out who told you that. But right now, that child needs help." "Hand him over." Shadow stepped closer, his amber eyes gleaming with a near-human plea. The German shepherd let out a deep, throaty bark, one that carried urgency rather than aggression, as though demanding the same thing his handler had just said. For the first time, Isabella faltered completely. Her arms slackened, her pale hands trembling so violently the bundle nearly slipped. She looked at Marcus, at Shadow, at the circle of strangers watching her unravel, and something in her broke. "I can't lose him again," she whispered, her voice hollow. The baby still had not moved. Marcus's stomach twisted with dread, but his voice stayed calm and firm. "We're not going to let you lose him. But you have to trust us." The platform hung in suspended silence, the truth hanging fragile and dangerous in the stale underground air. The station vibrated with tension, every eye locked on the strange tableau unfolding on the platform. Marcus Hayes, steady and unyielding. Officer Daniel Ruiz, tense at his side. Shadow coiled and growling like a living barrier, and Isabella Cruz clutching the unmoving bundle with a desperation that bordered on madness. The crowd buzzed with whispers, their voices sharp with suspicion and fear, when suddenly the crowd parted. From the southern stairwell emerged a woman, her movements quick despite the weight of age. She was in her late 60s, tall and broad-shouldered, her presence commanding even without a uniform. Her gray hair curled thick around her temples, spilling from beneath a woolen hat, and her face was lined with deep grooves carved by grief and time. She wore a heavy navy coat with buttons too large for her hands, which trembled slightly as she clutched a leather folder. In the crook of her arm were laminated photographs and medical records, corners bent from hurried handling. Her hazel eyes, sharp and brimming with emotion, swept the platform until they fell on Isabella and the child. Her voice, though raspy from age, carried across the tunnel like a bell. "Toby!" The name shattered the air. She stumbled forward, dropping the folder as the photos fanned across the filthy tiles. Pictures of a smiling toddler with brown curls, eyes wide with innocence, captured in moments of life too vibrant to reconcile with the limp form in Isabella's arms. "Grandma?" someone whispered from the crowd, the recognition spreading in murmurs. Marcus turned sharply toward the woman, recognizing the name from dispatch. This had to be Eleanor Moore, grandmother and legal guardian of the missing child. She was everything he expected and more. Resilient, dignified despite her pain, the kind of woman who had lived through storms and still stood. Eleanor staggered closer, her cheeks flushed from the winter wind outside, tears carving tracks down her weathered skin. "That's my grandson," she cried, her voice breaking. "Give him back to me, please!" Isabella flinched as though struck. Her pale blue eyes widened, and her arms tightened convulsively around the bundle. She spun in a half-circle, gaze wild, searching for escape. Her polished exterior was gone, replaced by the frantic movements of a trapped animal. "No!" Isabella screamed, her voice jagged with panic. "He's mine! They promised me he's mine!" She jerked back from Marcus, her coat flaring as she stumbled toward the dark tunnel that branched from the platform. The crowd gasped as Isabella broke into motion, clutching the boy too tightly as she barreled toward the shadows. "Stop!" Marcus roared, lunging forward, but Isabella was faster than he expected, her desperation fueling her flight. Shadow exploded into action. The shepherd surged forward with a guttural snarl, claws scraping sparks against the tile as he cut across Isabella's path. He was a streak of black and sable fur, muscles rippling, tail rigid. The woman shrieked as the dog leapt ahead of her, planting himself firmly between her and the tunnel, fangs flashing in the fluorescent light. The sound of his bark cracked like a gunshot, echoing through the cavern. The crowd erupted in shouts, some fearful, some cheering, phones held high to capture the unfolding drama. Ruiz sprinted after Marcus, his compact body weaving through the throng. His hand clutched the rail of the stairwell to steady himself as he closed the distance. Isabella froze, chest heaving, sweat dripping down her temples. Shadow's amber eyes locked on her with the intensity of a predator who would never yield. His lips curled back, every line of his body screaming one message: "You will not pass." Marcus slowed as he approached, keeping his voice even despite the thunder in his chest. "Isabella, it's over. There's nowhere to run. Hand over the child before someone gets hurt." Eleanor stumbled forward from behind, her voice raw with desperation. "Please, Toby, my sweet boy, come back to me. He needs care. He's sick. He's not yours. He's never been yours." Her words cracked, torn between rage and sorrow, but there was no mistaking the power in them. The name and plea pierced the air. Isabella's face crumpled, the fight in her faltering. Her grip on the child trembled, her pale skin ashen. For a moment she looked less like a villain and more like a broken woman clinging to the lies she had been fed. "I can't," Isabella whispered, her voice hollow. "They said he was mine again. They said he was him." My Charlie tears spilled freely, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Her words were fragmented, disconnected from reality, but her agony was real. Marcus took another step closer, lowering his tone, steady but firm. "I don't know who told you that, but they lied to you. That boy is Toby Moore, and he belongs with his grandmother. If you care about him at all, you'll let us help him now." Ruiz circled slightly to the side, his hand resting near his cuffs. His dark eyes were fixed on Isabella, watching for any twitch of sudden violence. His body was tense but ready, the cautious stance of a man who had nearly died once and never forgot it. Shadow gave a short, powerful bark, stepping an inch closer, his nose twitching towards the motionless child. It was as if the shepherd himself demanded the truth. Isabella's shoulders sagged, her body shaking. Her eyes darted between Marcus, Ruiz, Shadow, and the grandmother whose trembling hands reached out as though she could bridge the distance with love alone. "I just wanted him back," Isabella sobbed. "I couldn't lose him again." Eleanor's voice cut through the chaos, steady despite the tears. "You already lost your son, but this boy is not him. Don't take away my family because of your grief." The words broke something inside Isabella. With a final sob, her knees buckled slightly, and the bundle in her arms slipped downward. Marcus lunged forward, carefully but swiftly, scooping the boy into his arms before he could fall. The child was frighteningly limp, his small curls damp with sweat, his chest rising so faintly Marcus had to look twice to see it. Relief and dread collided in him at once. Eleanor collapsed to her knees, her arms reaching toward Marcus, her voice breaking into a cry of gratitude and anguish. Shadow planted himself at Marcus's side, still growling softly, eyes never leaving Isabella even as the woman slumped against the tiled wall, defeated. The platform was chaos. People shouting, cameras flashing, the sound of trains rumbling through the tunnels drowned by the drama on the platform. Yet for Marcus, Ruiz, Shadow, and Eleanor, the world had narrowed to the fragile boy in Marcus's arms and the unraveling woman before them. The confrontation had ended, but the deeper mystery of Isabella's strange claims had only just begun. The roar of the subway and the chatter of the crowd fell into a strange, brittle silence as Marcus Hayes tightened his arms around the limp child. The boy's body was too light, his skin clammy under the fluorescent glare, his chest rising so faintly it was almost imperceptible. Shadow pressed close to Marcus's side, growling softly, his amber eyes flicking between the unconscious child and the trembling woman against the wall. Eleanor Moore reached forward with desperate hands, tears streaking her cheeks, whispering the boy's name over and over. "Toby, Toby, please hold on." Marcus knelt carefully on the grimy tile floor, his large frame hunched over to shield the boy from prying eyes and cameras. He pulled back the soft blue blanket that had hidden the truth for too long. What he uncovered froze the air in his lungs. The toddler's eyelids fluttered faintly but did not open, his lips tinged with a pale bluish hue. A thin line of dried saliva crusted one corner of his mouth, and his body remained slack in Marcus's arms. Ruiz cursed under his breath. "He's drugged," he muttered, voice harsh. "Damn it, someone knocked him out." A woman pushed through the crowd then, her voice clear and commanding. "Make space! Paramedic coming through!" She was in her early 40s, medium height but solidly built, her brown hair streaked with early gray pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. Her uniform bore the FDNY paramedic insignia, and her black boots thudded firmly against the tile as she moved. Her name tag read, Marta Alvarez, and everything about her radiated competence. Her olive-toned skin glistened faintly from exertion, and her dark eyes carried the steady calm of someone who had pulled too many dying souls back from the brink. She knelt beside Marcus, slipping a medical bag from her shoulder. "I need to examine him." Now her voice was clipped, professional. Marcus handed Toby over reluctantly, the weight of the boy leaving his arms like a stone he had been unwilling to let go. Shadow whined low, crouching protectively as Marta began her work. Her hands moved quickly but gently, fingers brushing back the child's curls, pressing against his neck to find a pulse. "Weak, but present," she muttered. She pried open the boy's eyelids with care, then sniffed near his lips. Respiration, shallow. Pupils sluggish. She pulled a stethoscope from her kit and leaned close, listening. Her jaw tightened. "Yeah, he's been sedated. Heavy dose of something. We need to get him to a hospital immediately," Eleanor gasped, clutching her chest as though struck. "Oh, my sweet boy, who could do this to you?" Her voice cracked, her body trembling. She leaned heavily on the railing, her strength faltering after the surge of adrenaline that had carried her into the station. Isabella, still slumped against the wall, wailed suddenly. Her carefully curated elegance was gone, replaced by smeared makeup, sweat-soaked hair, and a face contorted with anguish. "I didn't mean to hurt him!" she screamed, her pale skin blotched red from tears. "They told me it was safe." "They said he would sleep, that it was only to keep him calm until I could bring him home." Her hands flailed helplessly in the air, fingers clawing at nothing, as though she were trying to tear away the invisible chains of her own delusion. Marcus rose slowly, his broad frame casting a shadow across her. "Who told you that, Isabella?" His voice was iron, his green eyes sharp. "Who gave you the drugs? Who told you this boy was yours?" She shook her head violently, her black hair falling from its bun in tangled strands. "You don't understand," she sobbed. "It was the program." "The retreat. They said he was my Charlie, my son. They promised I could have him back. They said children's souls can come again in new bodies if we believe, if we take them home. They lied. They lied to me." Her words spilled out in a rush of desperation, wild and fractured, but behind the madness was a terrifying kernel of truth. The crowd gasped, people whispering frantically, phones captured every moment, streaming the confession live across the city. Ruiz stepped closer, his dark brows knitted in disgust. "A cult," he said flatly, his deep voice edged with contempt. "She's wrapped up in some sick cult." Marta snapped her gloves off, already signaling toward the stairwell. "We need a stretcher down here now," she barked into her radio. Her tone carried the authority of someone who would not wait for permission. "This boy's life depends on speed." Marcus's chest felt heavy as stone. He looked at Isabella, her icy blue eyes now wide with terror and guilt, her body trembling like a cornered animal. He looked at Eleanor, who knelt beside Marta, whispering prayers through her sobs. And then he looked at Shadow, whose low, steady growl had softened into a whine as the shepherd pressed close to the boy on the stretcher that paramedics were rushing down the stairwell. The dog's amber eyes, so sharp and unyielding moments ago, now held something else, an unspoken plea for the boy's survival. As Toby was lifted gently onto the stretcher, his small hand brushed against Shadow's fur. The shepherd froze, then leaned in, his nose pressing lightly against the child's fingers. The crowd sighed collectively, some even crying, as though the dog's presence itself carried a promise that the boy would fight to return. Isabella collapsed fully to the ground, her voice cracking into incoherent sobs. "I only wanted him back," she whispered again and again. "I only wanted my son." Officers in dark uniforms pushed through the crowd then, their radios buzzing, cuffs gleaming in their hands. Marcus exhaled slowly, his jaw set, his eyes on the woman who had nearly doomed a child in her grief. But he knew she wasn't the true mastermind. Somewhere above this underground chaos, in polished offices or hidden retreats, there were people pulling strings, people who had convinced Isabella of a terrible lie. For now, though, there was only one truth that mattered. Toby Moore was alive, though barely, and thanks to Shadow's instinct and Eleanor's courage, he still had a chance. The sterile scent of antiseptic and the low hum of machines filled the pediatric wing of Bellevue Hospital. Night had descended over New York, snow drifting against the glowing city lights. But inside the ward, time seemed to hold still. Marcus Hayes stood by the glass partition, his tall frame silhouetted against the warm light of the recovery room where Toby Moore lay. The boy, small and fragile beneath the crisp white sheets, stirred faintly for the first time since leaving the subway. His curls damp with sweat, his lashes fluttered open, revealing wide brown eyes clouded with confusion. Eleanor Moore sat by the bedside, her weathered hands trembling as she clasped her grandson's tiny fingers. Tears streamed down her cheeks unchecked, but her voice was steady, a lullaby of comfort. "You're safe now, Toby. Grandma's here. You're safe." The boy blinked, then with sudden clarity reached out both arms and clung to her with the desperate strength of a child who had known too much fear. Eleanor sobbed openly, bending down to bury her face in his curls. Marcus felt his chest loosen, a weight lifting from his heart. Beside him, Shadow sat tall, ears perked, tail sweeping slowly across the polished hospital floor. The shepherd's amber eyes tracked every movement in the room with the vigilance of a guardian who knew his duty was not yet finished. Nurses passing in the hallway paused to glance, some smiling warmly at the sight of the dog, recognizing the bond between him and the boy he had saved. Officer Daniel Ruiz leaned against the wall nearby, arms crossed over his chest. His face was drawn, the shadows under his dark eyes deepened by fatigue. Yet in his expression was relief, tempered with the cautious realism of a man who knew this victory was only the beginning. "Kid's tougher than he looks," Ruiz murmured. "He'll pull through." Marcus nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. He's alive because Shadow wouldn't back down. His green eyes softened as he glanced at the dog, who pressed his nose briefly against the glass before resuming his watch. Later that morning, the hospital conference room filled with NYPD officers and investigators. Coffee cups steamed on the table, files stacked high. At the head sat Captain Leonard Briggs, a man in his late 50s with salt and pepper hair cropped short, a square jaw dusted with stubble, and a pair of wire-rimmed glasses perched low on his nose. Briggs's face was lined with years of service, his deep voice carrying the authority of decades on the job. Known for his no-nonsense leadership, he had earned both the respect and the fear of his officers by demanding precision and honesty. Briggs cleared his throat. "We've confirmed Isabella Cruz was manipulated by an organization operating under the name Everpine Restorative Retreat. They masquerade as a grief counseling and therapy program, but evidence suggests systematic exploitation of vulnerable parents. They convinced her this boy was her deceased son reborn." His tone was clipped, disgust curling his lips. This isn't just fraud. This is dangerous delusion, and it nearly killed a child. A younger detective across the table, Detective Rachel Ung, jotted notes in her neat, precise handwriting. She was in her early 30s, slender with straight black hair cut at her shoulders, her sharp almond-shaped eyes reflecting both intelligence and empathy. A second-generation Chinese-American, Rachel had joined the force after her brother's overdose had left her family shattered, channeling her grief into a determination to protect other families from predatory systems. "Captain," she said, her voice firm, "I've already pulled financial records. Everpine has ties to shell companies funneling money through multiple states. This is bigger than one retreat. It's a network." Briggs nodded grimly. "Then we're cracking it wide open. Task force starts today." Marcus listened in silence, arms folded. His mind wandered briefly to Isabella, now under psychiatric evaluation. Though she had nearly doomed a child, her haunted words echoed in his head. "They told me I could have him back." She was not innocent, but she was not the architect either. Somewhere out there were people orchestrating lies cruel enough to weaponize grief. Back at Bellevue, news of Toby's rescue spread like wildfire. Reporters gathered outside, cameras flashing, headlines splashed across evening broadcasts. "Canine hero saves abducted child in Times Square subway." Shadow's image appeared on screens across the nation, the German shepherd's intense eyes and unyielding stance frozen in photographs that captured the exact moment he had stopped Isabella from fleeing. Social media exploded with tributes, calling him a guardian angel in fur. 3 days later, a ceremony was held at Times Square itself. Under the neon glow of billboards, a crowd gathered as city officials, officers, and ordinary New Yorkers came together. Children held handmade signs, "Thank you, Shadow," while Eleanor stood at the front, Toby perched on her hip, healthier and smiling shyly at the dog beside Marcus. Captain Briggs stepped up to the microphone, his gravelly voice amplified across the square. "In a city that never sleeps, heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they walk on 4 legs. Today we honor Shadow, the K9 whose instincts saved a child's life and reminded us all of what vigilance, courage, and loyalty truly mean." The applause thundered, echoing off the skyscrapers. Shadow tilted his head, ears twitching at the noise, but remained calm, his gaze fixed on Toby, as if to assure himself the boy was safe. Marcus crouched to stroke his fur, murmuring, "This one's yours, buddy. You earned it." When the ceremony ended, Eleanor approached Marcus, her hazel eyes glistening with gratitude. "I'll never forget what you and your partner did. You gave me back my family." She lowered her gaze to Shadow, bending slightly to place a trembling hand on the shepherd's head. "And you, Angel? God surely sent you to us." Marcus swallowed hard, his throat tight. He looked at the towering signs around them, the endless lights, the crowd's joy. He thought of all the darkness he had seen, the lies that had nearly stolen a boy's life, and the fragile miracle that had restored it. Quietly, almost as a prayer, he whispered, "Sometimes God sends angels without wings. Sometimes he sends them with fur and eyes that see the truth, and tonight, that angel's name is Shadow." The city roared in applause once more, but Marcus barely heard it. He only saw the boy safe in his grandmother's arms, the dog steady at his side, and the faint hope that faith, even in a city scarred by cruelty, could still carve out miracles. Sometimes miracles do not come with thunder or lightning. Sometimes they arrive quietly in the form of a loyal dog refusing to move, a grandmother's unshaken love, or a child opening his eyes again after the world nearly lost him. In moments like these, we are reminded that God's hand still works among us, not always with angels in shining robes, but with guardians in fur and silent eyes that see what we cannot. Just as Shadow stood firm in the subway, each of us is called to protect, to care, and to act when truth is hidden and innocence is at stake. Life's greatest miracles often bloom in the everyday. When we choose faith over fear, when we choose compassion over indifference, and when we recognize that God still sends us signs, if only we pause to see them. If this story touched your heart, share it so others may feel the same light. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of courage, redemption, and faith. And may God bless you and your loved ones, guarding your steps as faithfully as Shadow guarded Toby that night.